They called them goddesses, but the studios called the shots. Ava Gardner brawled through Sinatra's chaos. Raquel Welch was branded difficult for fighting control, and Jane Fonda was punished for her politics. These weren't just Hollywood darlings. They were hated actresses, broken by MGM and scarred by studio abuse. Number 1. Raquel Welch. The bombshell who hated being a bombshell. One photograph defined her forever. A woman in a tattered fur bikini, standing against a prehistoric sky. In that single image from 1 million years BC, 1966, Raquel Welch became an icon. Yet what the world saw as her triumph, she came to see as her curse. Welch was not born into glamour. A Chicago girl raised in San Diego, she dreamed of ballet before Hollywood remade her into something else entirely. By the mid-1960s, studios were desperate to find the next Marilyn Monroe. Raquel's smoldering beauty and statuesque frame fit the bill. Fox plastered her image across magazines, posters, and dorm walls. But while audiences adored her, the industry never let her escape the title that would cling to her for decades: the sex symbol. She tried to prove she was more than that. In films like Fantastic Voyage, 1966, and The Three Musketeers, 1973, she fought for roles that showed wit, strength, even comedy. Her performance in The Three Musketeers won her a Golden Globe. Yet every time she walked onto a set, co-stars whispered she was difficult, directors called her demanding, and critics wrote as though her looks were the only thing worth mentioning. Richard Burton once described her as beautiful beyond belief, but insufferable. Others claimed she used her beauty as a weapon, ignoring the reality. She was simply a woman unwilling to be silenced in a man's industry. The backlash followed her off-screen. Her marriages were splashed across tabloids, each one painted as proof of her vanity. By age 30, she found herself divorcing her manager husband, Patrick Curtis, and walking away with just a token settlement, a single dollar. Despite years of work together, to the press, it was delicious scandal. To Raquel, it was betrayal. Through the 70s and 80s, she built her own empire: television specials, fitness videos, even Las Vegas residencies, but she never shook the image of the fur bikini. In interviews, she admitted the irony with a tight smile, that the role which gave her immortality had also shackled her for life. Raquel Welch wanted to be remembered as a versatile actress, a professional who survived the gauntlet of Hollywood sexism. Instead, the world turned her into a poster, and though the poster never faded, it left her longing for the respect that never came. Number 2. Jane Fonda. From Golden Girl to Hanoi Jane, she had the looks of a movie goddess and the bloodline of Hollywood royalty. Yet in one photograph, a single snapshot taken half a world away, Jane Fonda went from beloved star to one of the most hated women in America. The daughter of Henry Fonda, Jane seemed destined for stardom. Her breakout role in Barbarella, 1968, turned her into a pop culture sensation, while Clute, 1971, earned her an Academy Award. To many, she was the Golden Girl, a blend of beauty, intellect, and charisma that defined the new Hollywood of the late 1960s. But Jane was not content to simply bask in glamour. The Vietnam War raged, and she could not stay silent. She joined protests, marched with students, and spoke against what she saw as a senseless conflict consuming young American lives. At first, her activism was tolerated. Hollywood had always flirted with politics, and stars who spoke their conscience added a touch of modernity to the studio system's fading grip. But in 1972, Jane Fonda crossed a line that many Americans would never forgive. During a controversial trip to North Vietnam, she was photographed seated on an anti-aircraft gun, the very kind used to fire on American pilots. The image, splashed across front pages, ignited fury. Veterans called her a traitor. Families who had lost sons and brothers in the war vowed never to watch her films again. The nickname Hanoi Jane was born, and it clung to her for decades like a scar. The truth, as always, was more complex. Jane claimed she had been manipulated, that she never intended to humiliate soldiers, and in later years she issued public apologies. But the damage was permanent. For every admirer who praised her courage, another saw only betrayal. Studios hesitated to cast her, fearing boycotts. She was booed at rallies, shunned at airports, and vilified in ways no Hollywood darling had been before. And yet, she endured. She rebuilt her career with films like Coming Home, 1978, again winning an Oscar, and reinvented herself as the queen of the home workout with her aerobics empire in the 1980s. But the shadow of that one photograph never left. Jane Fonda will always be remembered as a star who dared to mix beauty with politics, and as the actress who proved that sometimes one image can undo a lifetime of applause. Number 3. Ava Gardner, the bad girl who loved Sinatra. The cameras adored her. Men worshipped her. But behind the velvet gowns and smoky eyes, Ava Gardner lived a life so combustible that even MGM, the most powerful studio in the world, had to keep her under control. She burst onto the Hollywood scene in the early 1940s, a North Carolina farm girl transformed into the era's ultimate femme fatale. MGM executives thought they could polish her into another refined studio lady. Instead, Ava tore through the screen with raw sensuality that frightened censors and thrilled audiences. By the time she starred in The Killers, 1946, opposite Burt Lancaster, her reputation was sealed. She wasn't just a starlet. She was dangerous. Her private life only heightened the legend. At just 19, MGM arranged her marriage to Mickey Rooney, the studio's golden boy. It lasted barely a year. She married again to bandleader Artie Shaw, who treated her intellect as something to fix with books and lectures. But it was her third marriage to Frank Sinatra in 1951 that set off Hollywood's loudest alarm bells. Sinatra left his wife, Nancy, for Ava, and the scandal nearly ended his career. Studios called her a temptress. Sinatra's Catholic fan base called her worse. Yet the pair clung to each other with a passion that was equal parts devotion and destruction. Theirs was no quiet romance. Arguments in hotel lobbies, whispered affairs, reconciliations in foreign villas. Their love was a headline machine. Ava once admitted she and Frank fought like two alley cats. But the truth was darker. His jealousy and her free spirit clashed until neither could breathe. Even their friends described them as doomed. By the late 1950s, Ava retreated to Spain, trading Hollywood for bullfighters, brandy, and an endless carousel of gossip. She claimed the studios had never understood her, and perhaps they didn't. She wasn't a Monroe, polished for perfection, nor a Hepburn, framed as wholesome. She was raw, unapologetic, and she lived as though every day might be her last. When she died in 1990, Sinatra wept openly, calling her the love of my life. The irony was unbearable. Hollywood spent decades trying to tame Ava Gardner, but the one man who loved her most could never hold on to her. But our next legend's secret was even harder to hide. Number 4. Tippi Hedren, the actress Hitchcock tried to own. She was the woman Alfred Hitchcock plucked from obscurity, molded into his perfect blonde, and then tried to keep as his own. What began as the dream of every young actress, a phone call from the master of suspense himself, spiraled into one of the darkest power struggles in Hollywood history. Tippi Hedren was not a seasoned starlet, clawing her way up the ladder. She was a Minnesota model, known for her elegance in department store ads, when Hitchcock spotted her in a 1962 commercial. To him, she was the embodiment of icy glamour, cool, blonde, unattainable. He signed her to a personal contract, something virtually unheard of at the time, and declared her the next Grace Kelly. For her very first film, he cast her in The Birds, 1963. The press hailed it as the biggest debut since Gone with the Wind. But inside the studio, the fairy tale began to rot. The grueling climax of The Birds left Hedren permanently scarred. Hitchcock had promised mechanical birds would be used. Instead, for 5 straight days, live gulls and crows were hurled at her, their beaks tearing at her skin, her eyes red from fear and exhaustion. Crew members whispered she was being punished. Hedren later admitted she collapsed in tears, barely able to stand. But the true torment was offset. Hitchcock's fascination with his young star grew obsessive. He demanded control over her life, dictating where she went, who she spoke to, even what she wore off-screen. When she resisted his advances, the mentor turned menacing. Hitchcock told her flatly if she walked away from him, her career would be over, and he made good on the threat. After forcing her into Marnie, 1964, he kept her locked in his contract, but refused to cast her in anything else. Offers from other studios were blocked. At the very moment she should have been Hollywood's newest sensation, she found herself trapped in silence. Though she eventually escaped the contract, the damage was done. Hedren never became the superstar Hitchcock promised she would be. Instead, she carried the scars of his obsession into later decades, speaking out only when Hollywood was finally willing to listen. The bitter irony is this: the director who prided himself on suspense and shock crafted his most disturbing story not on film, but in the life of the woman he claimed to discover. Number 5. Natalie Wood, Hollywood's porcelain tragedy. She looked as if she might shatter with a touch. Porcelain skin, wide, dark eyes, and a smile that masked the storms beneath. Natalie Wood was Hollywood's fragile treasure, and yet the industry handled her with anything but care. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938, she was thrust onto sets before she could read. By age 9, she was starring opposite Orson Welles in Tomorrow is Forever, 1946. MGM and Warner Brothers soon paraded her as the good little girl of post-war America. But behind the cameras, Natalie's domineering mother ruled with an iron hand. She arranged Natalie's every move, stage managing her friendships, her romances, even her fears. To the outside world, Wood was blossoming. Rebel without a cause, a 1955, with James Dean made her the ultimate teen star. But inside, paranoia grew. She was terrified of deep water, plagued by insecurities, and never convinced she deserved the adoration. Then came Robert Wagner. At 18, she married the handsome MGM heartthrob in 1957. They were the golden couple: youth, beauty, and studio approval. But the fairy tale fractured quickly. Rumors swirled of Wagner's jealousy, Natalie's flirtations, and whispered affairs with co-stars like Warren Beatty during Splendor in the Grass, 1961. The marriage collapsed in scandal, and Natalie, ever the dutiful star, took the blame to protect Wagner's image. Fans adored her again, but inside she was breaking. In the 1960s and 70s, Wood reinvented herself, winning praise for West Side Story and Gypsy. Yet she could not escape gossip columns. She remarried Wagner in 1972 in what tabloids called Hollywood's strangest sequel. Friends described constant tension, devotion laced with suspicion, romance undercut by bitter fights. To the public, Natalie was radiant. In private, she was unraveling. And then, the final irony. In 1981, after a night aboard her yacht near Catalina, Natalie Wood was gone. The official explanation offered no true closure, only more whispers, more theories, more shadows. For fans who grew up with Dorothy's Ruby Slippers or Maria's Hopeful Song, the idea of Natalie lost to the very element she feared since childhood was unbearable. Her life reads like a script Hollywood would never dare write. A glittering rise, a storm of scandals, and a final act that left nothing but questions. Natalie Wood was porcelain, yes, but it was the world around her that broke her. Number 6. Joan Crawford, the Queen Mother who inspired fear. She demanded respect with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. By the 1950s, Joan Crawford was no longer just a starlet draped in satin. She was Hollywood's self-crowned Queen Mother, ruling through sheer force of will. And like all rulers, she inspired as much fear as admiration. Crawford's rise had been the stuff of legend. Born Lucille Le Sueur in 1904, she clawed her way from poverty into MGM stardom during the Jazz Age, dancing her way through the 1920s flapper craze before remaking herself as a dramatic powerhouse in the 1930s and 40s. She won an Academy Award for Mildred Pierce, 1945, cementing her as one of the last great queens of the studio era. But by the mid-century, the glow of her earlier triumphs had hardened into something colder. She was no longer the ingenue. She was the formidable matriarch, desperate to protect her throne in an industry that worshipped youth. Her feud with Bette Davis became Hollywood's most infamous Cold War. On the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, 1962, their rivalry erupted into a spectacle of jealousy and sabotage. Crawford allegedly slipped weights into her costume to make Davis struggle during a lifting scene. Davis fired back with insults that stung for years. The film was a hit, but it etched Crawford's reputation as a woman impossible to love and dangerous to cross. Off-screen, darker shadows gathered. Crawford had adopted 4 children, presenting herself as the picture of maternal devotion. But her daughter Christina later published the scathing memoir Mommy Dearest, 1978, painting a portrait of cruelty. Wire hangers as weapons, nights filled with icy rage, a mother obsessed with control. Whether entirely true or partly exaggerated, the book fused with Crawford's public image, making her seem less like the glamorous star of Grand Hotel and more like the villain of a Gothic tragedy. By the 1960s, Crawford's icy professionalism was often described as arrogance. Directors called her impossible. Co-stars complained she was manipulative, and gossip columnists fueled the perception that she was Hollywood's great dragon lady. And yet, even in her final years, she clung to the rituals of stardom: immaculate makeup, carefully staged photographs, a desperate refusal to be forgotten. The bitter irony is this: Joan Crawford spent her life chasing immortality on screen. She achieved it, but at the cost of being remembered less for her triumphs and more for the fear she left in her wake. Number 7. Janet Leigh, Psycho Darling, Unlucky Wife. She gave the world one of cinema's most unforgettable screams, yet her real life contained wounds that even Hitchcock couldn't stage. Janet Leigh was immortalized in a shower of terror, but behind the glitter of stardom, her private world with Tony Curtis was unraveling piece by piece. Born Jeanette Morrison in 1927, she was discovered almost by accident when Norma Shearer spotted her photograph at MGM in the 1940s. Quickly, she became the studio's wholesome beauty, elegant, approachable, the perfect ingenue for post-war audiences. By the late 1950s, her career had blossomed. Little Women, 1949, Angels in the Outfield, 1951, and a string of MGM hits made her a familiar face. But it was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, that branded her forever. Her shocking exit in the first act stunned audiences, her terrified expression frozen in cinematic history. She should have been Hollywood's untouchable darling. Off-screen, however, the cameras told a different story. Leigh had married Tony Curtis in 1951, a golden couple who looked like they had stepped out of a studio's publicity still. He was the fast-rising heartthrob. She was the respected leading lady. Together, they were supposed to be unstoppable. But Curtis, forever insecure, confessed later that he always felt lesser beside her. Leigh's fame eclipsed his at times, and Hollywood whispered about Curtis's jealousy. Their daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, would later admit that their home was filled with tension, resentment, competition, jealousy, rancor, tabloids fanned the flames, hinting at Curtis's wandering eye and accusing Leigh of confiding too closely with co-stars. Rumors swirled of Frank Sinatra's attention, whispers that struck Curtis to the core. The marriage grew more brittle, even as they posed for glossy magazines with perfect smiles. By the mid-1960s, the fractures were beyond repair. Their divorce in 1962 shocked fans who had believed in the fairy tale. Leigh pressed on, carving out a respected career in both film and television. She carried herself with grace, even as Curtis aired regrets in interviews years later. To the public, she was still the star who screamed in that motel shower. To her family, she was the woman who carried scars no camera could capture. In the end, Janet Leigh's tragedy was not the knife on screen. It was the love story that crumbled under the weight of jealousy, Hollywood pressure, and dreams too fragile to survive the spotlight. Number 8. Julie Andrews, America's sweetheart, but not off-camera. She floated into Hollywood on an umbrella, singing to the clouds, and the world fell instantly in love. Julie Andrews was Mary Poppins, Maria von Trapp, the very embodiment of innocence and joy. But when the cameras stopped rolling, colleagues whispered a different story, one of distance, pride, and a sharp tongue that could silence a room. Andrews began on the London stage, a child prodigy with a crystalline voice trained in operatic precision. By the late 1950s, she had conquered Broadway with My Fair Lady and Camelot. Walt Disney himself cast her in Mary Poppins, 1964, where her charm and warmth captured hearts worldwide and won her an Academy Award. A year later, The Sound of Music, 1965, cemented her place as America's sweetheart, the wholesome governess who sang her way into history. For audiences, Julie was perfection, pure, humble, radiant. Yet fame has a way of magnifying the cracks beneath the shine. On the 1966 set of Hawaii, her co-star Richard Harris saw something far less angelic. He later claimed she was condescending and mean, describing her as cold to colleagues and quick to remind others of her own discipline and professionalism. He recalled moments where she huddled with directors, speaking in hushed tones, only for him to break in with biting humor, a tactic he said enraged her. To Harris, the beloved nanny was no saint, but a woman with steel in her spine and frost in her words. Others in Hollywood echoed similar sentiments. Directors admired her dedication, but found her exacting, sometimes intolerant of mistakes. Crew members joked that she seemed more like a headmistress than a co-star. It was an image at odds with her public persona. And in the gossip-driven press of the 1960s, the contrast was irresistible. Articles framed her as two Julies, the angel on screen, the ice queen off it. Still, Andrews endured. She reinvented herself in the 1980s and 90s with roles that winked at her past, and she became a beloved elder stateswoman of the screen. Yet the whispers never fully disappeared. The irony is haunting. Julie Andrews built her career on kindness and charm, only to be remembered by some who knew her best as anything but. Number 9. Sophia Loren, Italy's jewel who rattled Hollywood. She was the face that made entire nations stop and stare. With her luminous eyes, commanding presence, and curves that seemed sculpted from marble, Sophia Loren was hailed as Italy's national treasure. But in Hollywood, beauty that immense was not always a blessing. It was a weapon, and one that frightened as many men as it enthralled. Born Sofia Villani in Rome, she grew up in wartime poverty, often surviving on little more than bread crusts and determination. By the early 1950s, she was winning beauty contests and landing bit parts in films. Italian producer Carlo Ponti, the man who became her lifelong love and eventual husband, guided her rise. With Houseboat, 1958, opposite Cary Grant, and Two Women, 1960, she conquered both comedy and tragedy. Two Women earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress. the first ever given for a foreign language role. Suddenly, Sophia was not just Europe's jewel. She was a global queen. But Hollywood is rarely kind to women who refuse to play submissive. On the set of El Cid, 1961, Sophia clashed bitterly with Charlton Heston. Rumors claimed her contract gave her top billing and a higher salary, facts that enraged her co-star. Heston allegedly demanded a stand-in be used for close-ups of Loren, refusing to allow the camera to linger solely on her. Directors found themselves refereeing battles of ego. Behind the gossip, one truth rang clear. Sophia Loren would not bow, not even to America's most masculine heroes. Jealousy followed her wherever she went. Fellow actresses dismissed her as too ambitious, while tabloids painted her as spoiled, dramatic, impossible to please. She demanded shorter shooting schedules, better scripts, and paychecks that matched her box office draw, the very same things her male peers demanded, without consequence. To the Hollywood establishment, Sophia was too powerful, a foreign woman who dared to dictate terms in an industry that expected women to smile and obey. Yet the legend endured. While whispers of arrogance trailed her for decades, audiences never turned away. Sophia Loren's power, the very thing that threatened jealous men and rival stars, is precisely what secured her immortality. The irony of her story is this: Hollywood tried to punish her for refusing to play small. Instead, she became larger than life. Number 10. Mia Farrow, the innocent with the most public feud. She had the face of an angel and the voice of a whisper. Fragile, ethereal, unforgettable. But behind Mia Farrow's porcelain beauty was a lifetime of betrayals. Each one splashed across headlines until her private grief became a public spectacle. Born in 1945 into Hollywood lineage, her father, writer-director John Farrow, and her mother, actress Maureen O'Sullivan, Mia seemed destined for the screen. Yet her path was marked by turbulence. Her first marriage, at only 21, was to Frank Sinatra, a union that fused glamour with chaos. Sinatra was 30 years her senior, and their stormy love ended almost as quickly as it began. Within a few years, Mia had traded the crooner's shadow for Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby, 1968, where she delivered the performance that made her America's fragile ingenue. With her pixie haircut and haunted eyes, she looked like innocence itself. But that image would be shattered in the 1980s and 90s, when her relationship with Woody Allen consumed the gossip columns. Their partnership began as art house perfection. He, the eccentric genius; she, the devoted muse, starring in Hannah and Her Sisters, 1986, and a string of Allen's most acclaimed films. For a time, they seemed inseparable, until betrayal surfaced in the cruelest way imaginable. In 1992, Mia discovered that Allen had begun a romance with her adopted daughter, Soon-Yi Previn. The revelation tore the family apart and triggered one of Hollywood's ugliest custody battles. Soon after, Mia's daughter Dylan accused Allen of misconduct, charges he denied, but that split the family into warring camps. Some children sided with Mia, others with Allen. The public, once charmed by the wide-eyed waif from Rosemary's Baby, now watched as her personal life was dissected in courtrooms and tabloids. The sweet, almost childlike actress was recast as a scorned mother, fighting a war she could never truly win. Even decades later, the feud haunts her name. Interviews, memoirs, documentaries all circle back to that moment, that rupture. For some, she is the courageous mother who stood against betrayal. For others, she is a figure forever tied to bitterness and accusation. The tragic irony of Mia Farrow's story is this: she spent her life playing the role of innocence, yet it was her innocence that Hollywood stripped from her, leaving behind only scandal's shadow. Number 11. Brigitte Bardot, the goddess who turned to rage. She was the face of desire, the woman who could bring Paris to a standstill with a single glance. Yet the same lips that once whispered romance on screen would later spit fire, leaving her admirers stunned and her legacy divided. Brigitte Bardot exploded onto the international stage in the 1950s. Her film And God Created Woman, 1956, turning her into the very embodiment of sensual freedom. With tousled blonde hair and a gaze both innocent and dangerous, she was hailed as France's answer to Marilyn Monroe. Crowds followed her through the streets of Saint-Tropez. Paparazzi trailed her at every turn. For a decade, she lived as though the world itself was her stage. Each photograph a performance, each affair a headline. She was Europe's goddess of love, worshipped in every corner of the globe. But the pedestal soon became a prison. Tired of being objectified, Bardot abandoned film in the 1970s, turning her focus to animal rights, a cause she championed with ferocity. Yet her activism often came laced with venom. Her statements, once playful and flirtatious, grew harsh and polarizing. She condemned French traditions, criticized immigration, and made political alliances that shocked her old admirers. The adoration of yesterday curdled into outrage, with headlines branding her bitter, reactionary, even dangerous. Hollywood, once dazzled by her beauty, recoiled at her bluntness. She was no longer the fantasy of satin sheets and seaside trysts, but a woman unafraid to ignite fury. Friends drifted away. Studios stayed silent, and her once golden image was stained by controversy after controversy. Admirers who once cut out her pictures for bedroom walls now debated her in whispers, wondering how the goddess of youth had transformed into a prophet of anger. And yet, in her own way, Bardot never apologized. She saw herself not as a fallen star, but as a woman finally unmasked. Tired of playing the doll the world demanded, her words may have tarnished her legacy, but they also revealed the fiery independence that fame had long hidden. The bitter irony remains. Brigitte Bardot conquered the world with beauty and charm, only to spend her later years fighting it with rage. Number 12. Claudia Cardinale, the tomboy who drove men wild. She walked into auditions with the stride of a soldier, not the sway of a siren. That alone was enough to scandalize men who wanted their starlets soft, submissive, and smiling. Claudia Cardinale burst onto the European screen in the late 1950s. A Tunisian-born Italian beauty with dark eyes that dared you to look away. She was the antithesis of polished Hollywood glamour, earthy, fiery, unpredictable. By the early 1960s, she was starring opposite Marcello Mastroianni in 8½, and Charlton Heston in The Magnificent Adventure, proof that both European auteurs and American moguls couldn't resist her. With her husky voice and unpolished candor, she didn't act like the ingenue directors were used to molding. She acted like herself, but for every admirer who praised her independence, there were rivals who seethed. Co-stars whispered that she was too unruly, a woman who refused to bow to studio etiquette. Directors found her refusal to obey every cue infuriating. When others arrived on set demure and deferential, Claudia appeared with a boyish laugh and a will of iron. Rumors followed her that she clashed with Visconti, that she mocked producers behind their backs, that she was impossible to control. In an era when obedience was prized, her free spirit was rewritten by gossip columns as arrogance. Yet, Cardinale's defiance was born not of vanity, but survival. Early in her career, she had been thrust into contests and contracts without her consent, treated like a commodity rather than a woman. That rebellion, once her shield, became her brand and her curse. Hollywood, though enchanted by her beauty, didn't know how to package her. She wasn't Bardot, all curves and seduction. She wasn't Loren, the regal queen. She was the tomboy who smoked between takes, who spoke her mind, who would rather fight than flirt. And still, audiences adored her. They saw in her not an unmanageable starlet, but a woman whose passion bled into every performance. Her unruliness was the same fire that lit up the screen, the quality that made her unforgettable. The very thing that directors called a problem was, to the world, her gift. In the end, Claudia Cardinale proved the irony of her critics. The men who branded her difficult only made her legend larger, a star who refused to be tamed. Number 13. Deborah Kerr, the lady with secrets behind her smile. Her smile was as polished as porcelain, but porcelain can crack. Behind the grace and refinement that made her Hollywood's proper lady, Deborah Kerr carried whispers of choices and passions that unsettled the very industry that adored her. Deborah Kerr, the Scottish-born actress with flaming red hair and an unmistakable poise, rose to fame in the 1940s as MGM's answer to elegance. On screen, she played nuns, schoolteachers, dutiful wives, the moral compass of films like Black Narcissus, 1947, and From Here to Eternity, 1953. Yet it was that latter film that began to unravel her prim reputation. The sight of Kerr, once typecast as untouchable, locked in a forbidden beachside embrace with Burt Lancaster, shocked audiences and critics alike. The woman who had been Hollywood's symbol of restraint had suddenly crossed into taboo territory. But scandal brewed not just on the screen. Kerr's private life became a playground for rumor. Her first marriage to RAF pilot Anthony Bartley was riddled with stories of jealousy and betrayal, while gossip columns hinted at affairs with her co-stars. Some claimed Clark Gable charmed her during the filming of The Hucksters, while others swore she was too close to Lancaster long after the cameras stopped rolling. Though nothing was ever proven, the whispers chipped away at her pristine image. For peers who had endured stricter scrutiny, Kerr's ability to hold on to her lady branding while skirting scandal sparked envy, admiration, mixed with resentment. Hollywood, too, grew distrustful of her duality. Studios never knew if she'd deliver the saintly woman audiences expected or the sultry rebel who had stunned the censors. Her refusal to sign binding long-term contracts, a bold move for the time, gave her unusual freedom, but also fueled the perception that she was unreliable. While she earned 6 Oscar nominations, she never won competitively, an omission some chalked up to Hollywood's lingering suspicion of her off-screen complexities. Yet the true irony of Deborah Kerr's career lies in the very secrets behind her smile. She maintained her dignity, never confirming nor denying the rumors, allowing mystery to drape her like one of her couture gowns. To the public, she remained the lady of elegance. To Hollywood insiders, she was the woman who had danced too close to danger. And perhaps that was Kerr's quiet triumph. Her secrets never destroyed her. They made her unforgettable. Number 14. Anne Bancroft. Mrs. Robinson wasn't acting. The camera adored her, but it feared her too. Anne Bancroft could walk into a room and silence men who thought themselves untouchable. A gift and a curse in the golden halls of Hollywood. Bancroft's career began in the 1950s. Another brunette beauty shuffled between contract pictures and television guest spots, but she refused to stay in the shadows. By the early 1960s, she had seized control of her image, delivering smoldering performances in The Miracle Worker, 1962, and earning an Academy Award that should have cemented her as a serious dramatic force. Yet, it was 1967's The Graduate that redefined her forever. As Mrs. Robinson, she draped herself in cigarette smoke and cynicism, transforming into the very image of dangerous seduction. The role electrified audiences and terrified co-stars. Dustin Hoffman, a newcomer at the time, later confessed he was genuinely unsettled by her commanding presence. He was meant to play the nervous young man, but Bancroft made the intimidation real. Friends whispered that Mrs. Robinson wasn't acting. She was Bancroft herself, sharp, sensual, and unafraid to dominate. Some colleagues found her magnetic, while others found her impossible. Behind closed doors, she could be cutting, her words leaving bruises deeper than fists. To studio executives, Her insistence on respect was framed as arrogance. To rivals, her refusal to soften herself became ammunition. Hollywood thrived on compliance, especially from women, and Bancroft was anything but compliant. She bristled at shallow roles, turned down films that bored her, and demanded equal footing with male counterparts. Even her marriage to comic genius Mel Brooks became a subject of gossip. The fiery actress and the madcap comedian, a pairing some claimed couldn't last. Yet, it endured, though insiders whispered of volcanic arguments behind the laughter. By the 1980s and 90s, Bancroft had become a paradox, revered for her craft, yet carefully avoided by some who feared her temper and her tongue. She left behind a string of unforgettable performances, but also a reputation for being difficult. And in the end, perhaps that was her truest performance. A woman who refused to smile sweetly for the system. For Anne Bancroft, Mrs. Robinson wasn't just a role. It was a warning that the most dangerous thing in Hollywood was a woman who refused to play nice. Number 15. Patricia Neal. The survivor with too many feuds. She could light up the screen with quiet strength and dim it just as quickly with a single outburst. Patricia Neal was a woman who never learned how to play small, and Hollywood both applauded and punished her for it. Neal's rise began in the late 1940s, when Warner Brothers touted her as a fresh American beauty with brains to match. By the 1950s, she was starring opposite giants like Gary Cooper, a relationship that soon blurred the line between script and scandal. She was talented, she was magnetic, but she was also stubborn. Directors whispered about her tendency to argue through takes, pushing for her interpretation rather than bowing to studio authority. What they called difficult, Neal called art. The storm grew louder on the set of Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961, while Audrey Hepburn floated across the screen in pearls and black satin. Neal seethed behind the camera. Cast as Paul Varjak's wealthy mistress, she bristled at being relegated to the background. Crew members recalled tense silences broken only by her biting comments, while co-stars complained she carried herself as though she were the star. Her sharp tongue made her feared, and her unwillingness to flatter directors made her easy to resent. By the time the film wrapped, Neal's reputation for volatility overshadowed her undeniable screen presence, yet her career refused to collapse. She roared back with HUD, 1963, playing the weary housekeeper opposite Paul Newman. The performance earned her an Academy Award, but even that night whispers followed her, the applause for her brilliance mixed with murmurs about the battles she had waged along the way. Off-screen, her marriage to writer Roald Dahl was a study in stormy endurance, filled with fiery exchanges that mirrored her Hollywood feuds. Then, fate delivered its cruelest blow. In 1965, she suffered a series of near-fatal strokes, collapsing at the height of her stardom. Doctors doubted she would ever act again, but Patricia Neal did what she always did. She fought back. With grueling determination, she returned to the screen, her presence sharper, her defiance undimmed. Still, the scars of her feuds lingered. For every director who praised her grit, another branded her impossible. And perhaps that was Patricia Neal's true legacy, a woman who would rather be remembered as combative than forgotten as compliant. Number 16. Julie Christie, darling turned rebel. She was the golden smile of the swinging 60s, a face that promised glamour, temptation, and danger all at once. But just when Hollywood thought it had claimed her as its newest jewel, Julie Christie slipped through its fingers, walking away from the very fame others begged for. Christie became an international sensation with Darling, 1965, the film that captured her as the very embodiment of modern desire. She won an Academy Award for her role as a social climber, her honey blonde hair and sly grin cementing her as the decade's it girl. Directors lined up, and stars like Warren Beatty sang her praises. But behind the dazzling facade was a woman who despised the machinery of celebrity. She found the endless interviews shallow, the studio contract suffocating, and the manufactured image of sex symbol a gilded cage. The cracks began to show almost immediately. Christie turned down major roles, sometimes without explanation, infuriating producers who had counted on her bankable charm. Rumors spread that she was prissy and aloof, unwilling to play the Hollywood game. When she began openly aligning herself with political and environmental causes in the early 1970s, the whispers grew louder. What other starlet would lecture about nuclear disarmament or refuse projects because they clashed with her principles? To executives in Los Angeles, Christie wasn't rebellious. She was dangerous. Even her romances carried a whiff of scandal. Her long and tempestuous relationship with Warren Beatty was a tabloid goldmine, filled with speculation about fights, reconciliations, and the actress's refusal to settle down. Friends noted she carried herself with a mixture of warmth and distance, magnetic, but never fully yours. Co-stars admired her talent, but sometimes bristled at her blunt honesty. More than one director confessed she was too headstrong for her own good. By the 1980s, Hollywood barely recognized her. Christie preferred the quiet English countryside to Beverly Hills mansions, lending her time to charities instead of studio dinners. Offers came and went, but she accepted only on her own terms, appearing sporadically in films that spoke to her rather than the marketplace. And so the woman who once defined glamour became an unlikely rebel, remembered as much for what she refused as for what she embraced. In the end, Julie Christie's greatest scandal wasn't a love affair or a feud. It was her decision to walk away from everything others believed was worth fighting for. Behind the velvet curtains, Hollywood's brightest stars were left in ruins, shaped, broken, and discarded by the studios that built them. Their pain remains part of cinema's legacy. Share your thoughts below. Every comment keeps their stories alive. And if you found value here, like and subscribe for more forgotten truths.